The Division, Predator's Mark. I've been using the Predator's Mark set now for a while, and as with all things in the Division, because you don't get very detailed numbers and statistics on what you're doing, it's very hard to compare the efficiency and effectiveness of a certain gear composition with any other choice you might have made. So, with the Predator's Mark, I decided to do an in-depth analysis of it. Let's have a look at it. First of all, the Predator's Mark 4-set bonus. Hit 10 shots without switching target to make the target bleed for 50% of the damage already done by those bullets. Let's just look at that. That means that the cumulative damage of 10 bullets is the base for your bleed. Okay, so far so good. Let's have a look at a weapon, a standard weapon. Let's go for G36. 14.4k damage per shot. 10 shots equals 144,000 damage. Okay, so far so good. That is your base for the bleed, and it's 50%, so that is roughly 72k damage. That will then be spread over a certain time interval, which, as far as I've calculated, is 10 seconds. We'll verify that in a second. Which means that when you look at it from a comparison point of view, the easiest thing to do is to look at a DPS. So you need to find out what is the DPS of this particular weapon. You do 144,000 damage with 10 shots. You know that it shoots 750 times per minute, which means that in order to fire 10 shots, it's slightly less than 1 second. So the DPS is, you know, somewhere above 144,000, 160,000 really is the DPS of it. Don't worry about what the game tells you about DPS. It's just no, just don't. I won't go there. So let's say that the damage of this weapon is 150,000 DPS. We will do the specific calculations in a bit, but just bear with me for a second. That means that you've got your 72,000 damage from the bleed staggered over 10 seconds. That adds another 7.2k DPS. And then you think 7.2k DPS on top of the DPS you're already doing, 150k give or take. That's not a lot. And that's when I started thinking, and that's when I started testing. There are a few things you can do with the bleed. But we'll get into the testing in a bit, but let me just show you what you can do with the bleed to start with. So when you look at your talents, there's one particular one here, shrapnel. Applying bleed to any target triggers a 30% chance to apply the effect to all targets within 10 meters. So in a PvE situation, you will 30% of the time apply this bleed to whomever's nearby. Let's say that's 2 or 3 targets. Let's be generous and say this will double the effectiveness of your Predator's Mark. Okay? So just two facts to take into consideration here. One, shrapnel can double the effectiveness of your bleed. Okay? Even in PvP could be useful, not as useful because targets are typically spread more and there are not that many of them. The other fact is the bleed takes about 10 seconds to bleed out. So let's go into testing, because my theory is this. When you look at a weapon, you look at the base damage, 13.1k here. Because the base of the bleed is the damage of 10 bullets, it stands to reason that the higher the base damage of the weapon, the higher the value of the bleed. Right? So this does 13.1, 14.4, 17.9. You see what I mean? Because it is not calculated based on your DPS, but based on the base damage of the weapon, the bleed should go up with the damage of the weapon. We'll look at some sniper rifles as well, and we'll do that calculation. But for now, let's get into testing the weapons. Okay, so first up, the AK-47. As you saw, it had the 18k base damage. You see the hits going in around 19.6k. We're ignoring the crits, and here comes the bleed, 12.2k. Okay. and it's just ticking away, and it's roughly 10 seconds. Then switching to the G36, shooting for 15k, as you'd expect. It's a 15k base weapon, and then the bleed comes in 9.6k. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to collect up all these test statistics, and we're going to look at what the numbers tell us at the end of it. Let's have a little look then at something which is becoming increasingly popular, the M60. Here we go. Okay, it's hitting for the 18k mark. I'm just using body shots so we don't get, you know, distance and optimal range and range drop off, and then, you know, you see the tick at 13k. Next then, we'll have a look at the SVD. Now that has a very high base damage, right? 40k per shot. We're doing the 10 shots, you can see the Predator's mark is ticking up. And here comes the bleed, 25k, 24.5 if you're pedantic. That's interesting. So let's have a look at the M44. We'll start by doing something at longer range, but we're going to hit for the head just to see. We want to get both the comparable M44 and want to get a more realistic scenario. You see the bleed coming in here, 148k. You saw the hits doing 220 to 270 with the crit. So let's tone down the M44 and do it just like we've done all the others, and then we'll have a look at the numbers. Okay, so 84k, and the bleed should come in short order. 3 shots, 2 shots, 1 shot, and here comes the bleed. 59k as you would expect. Now, so having collected the data, it is time to have a look at our theory that bleed damage augmentation scales with the base damage of the weapon. Here's the raw data from G36 all the way up to the M44, and using the M44 for longer range headshots. And you can see we've got the base damage, the round per minute, the hit that our test reveals, that's test data, not sheet data, the bleed coming out of it, and then the calculated DPS, as in thousands of damage per second, essentially calculated from the hit and the RPM, and then the bleed DPS as calculated from what we observed based on an assumption and a measurement that the bleed will run for 10 seconds. And as you can see, if you map the data for the weapon's hit DPS and the bleed DPS, you will see that the DPS does increase as the weapon base damage goes up. That's what it looks like anyway, based on these weapons. So let's take that one step further and look at the calculated percentage increase in damage from the bleed on a single target. Now here we go to G36 around the 6% mark, the M60 8.8. You don't really see a big augmentation until you get to the SVD and the MK17 around the 13-14% mark, and then of course the M44 you are now up near the 74% mark, both on short range and long range. A very interesting development right there. We'll discuss that in a little bit. And if you map it out, that is what it looks like. And I would say, even though it's a limited set of data, most statisticians would say that there is a correlation between the base weapon damage and the augmentation. It's not linear by the looks of it, but then the data sample in the higher end of base damage is quite low. So this is where it gets really interesting, because you remember, of course, that this is a single target bleed. If you can apply that bleed to multiple targets, then essentially you can opt to double the effectiveness. But the conclusion for me is, for certainly assault rifles and SMGs, I didn't test any SMGs, but you can imagine them being to the left side of this graph. Certainly for those weapons, the increase is quite limited, and compared to some of the other sets, yeah, I'd say not great. Okay. Now, if you look at the Mark 17 and the SVD, it relies on your ability to pump 10 shots and hit into the same enemy quickly, and those weapons are capable of doing that. And then you get a reasonable 15-ish% damage increase, and of course if you can then spread the bleed, then you might be hitting 20, 25. You probably wouldn't hit 30%. And one of the factors of that is it would have, the engagement would have to be 10 seconds or more for that efficiency to really kick in, okay, for the bleeds to start stacking up the damage. So as a method of fighting, it's backloaded damage, as opposed to hitting people full on in the face with a sniper rifle, pulse, and all of the good things. That's front loaded damage. Here we're talking backloaded bleed damage. Spread the bleed to an entire enemy group, or group of 7, 8, 9 enemies, and you're really racking up that damage. However, with the changes in 1.4, I would suggest that most engagements with NPCs, they're not in some of the challenging heroic mode incursions, are not that. They're short, they're brief, 10 seconds, and everything's wiped out anyway. So not great. When you then look at the far right of it, you're thinking, wow, a 75% increase, that is fantastic. Yes, it is. But the M44 shoots less than 1 shot per second. So again, you're running into this. Your fight needs to last now more than 20 seconds for you to really get that damage boost out of it. Okay. And that's not great. That's not great. Just being able to hit someone 10 times in a row over a 10-second interval, and it has to be the same target. I mean, even the NPCs don't stay up for that long. They will take cover. So I'd say for the high damage, low RPM sniper rifles, this is a no-go. You would think that for something that can pump into an enemy 10 shots really quickly, like an LVOAC or one of the SMGs, that'd be fantastic. But because of the low weapon damage, your bleed output is minimal, and therefore not really worth it, and you're better off going for say an Alpha Bridge or some of the other builds, Sentries or whatever's around these days. So having run this build for a week, I have now shifted to an Alpha Bridge build, and I am loving it. It is wrecking people, both using assault rifle, SMGs. I'm also toying around with a Hunter's Faith build as a support character for PvE, which is really good fun. So until next time, when I will be doing those videos as well, assuming that this video is interesting to you guys, leave it a like or promote it or whatever, you know. If it's interesting, I'll do a Hunter's Faith, and I'll do an Alpha Bridge video as well. I had a really good run today. So until next time, stay frosty.